views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your rights and options. We have a very big show today. We have three very interesting topics: COVID and prisons, the update we're going to get from State Senator Luis Sepúlveda. An interesting topic as well, Fort Hood in Texas and the 28 individuals, unfortunately, soldiers who have passed away under some very strange circumstances. We're going to get to the bottom of that with José Menéndez, a Texas state senator. And finally, we're going to be discussing the restaurants in New York City and basically how they're surviving. Can they survive? We're going to have somebody from the Hospitality Alliance here. So as you can see, we have much to get to. Stay tuned. Today's Verdict will start right now. To have returning to today's Verdict, Andrew Rigie, the executive director at the New York City Hospitality Alliance. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Well, thank you. Hanging in there. You know, my job to stay positive and keep fighting for the future of the city's restaurant nightlife industry.
Honestly, you must be the busiest man in New York City, because if anybody needs you, it's the restaurant industry. And this is the toughest, probably the toughest time the restaurant industry maybe has ever faced in New York City. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we have gone through crises in the past, but the size and scope of this crisis is just of a whole other magnitude. Listen, I thought pre-pandemic, New York City's restaurant and nightlife was 24/7, but somehow during this crisis, we've figured out a way to put more hours in the day to keep fighting and helping people.
Well, Andrew, last time you were with us, let's catch everybody up. The first time you were with us, didn't look like there was anything opening up. There was no outdoor dining. There was no nothing.
Yeah.
We've made some headway. What are your thoughts in terms of at least how far we've progressed as a city with respect to the restaurants?
Yeah, well, every step forward is better than standing still or moving backwards. We have the outdoor dining, which is not going to save the industry, but it's been critically important to give these businesses and these jobs or bring people back to work. There's more than 10,300 restaurants that have been participating in outdoor dining. It's been incredibly important. And now the city is going to move to make it permanent because it's been so popular. So this is a monumental task of reimagining how we use public space to help, support our local businesses, but also create a vibrancy and an energy that I think our city needs as a whole. And now on the 30th of September, we are opening up for indoor dining at a 25% occupancy with a roadmap to get to 50% indoor occupancy, hopefully by November 1st, if all the health metrics and everything stay at an okay level.
Well, Andrew, but this is how I look at it, because I've been really, I've been using the outdoor dining. My wife and I, we've been using it in Manhattan fairly often, and it's starting to get a little chilly.
Yeah.
Now, if it turns out that we don't eat outdoors as much because it's too chilly, and they lose that 25% of outdoor, and then they just go back indoor for the 25%, it almost seems like it's just a wash. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, there's no solution. I hear people about all these policies. Well, that's all they're doing, or this is all they're doing. I think what we need to recognize is we need a lot of ongoing policies from all levels of government to help in as many different ways, to help as many different business owners as possible. Because while there's these overarching themes about the types of challenges and support, businesses all are impacted differently. How much delivery business did you have? How many outdoor tables and chairs do you have? Are you one of those restaurants maybe that hasn't been open in 6 months because you couldn't do the outdoor dining? What is 25% or 50% occupancy look like based on your total occupancy? So there's all of these factors, and there's not going to be one solution that just saves the whole industry. Truth be told, pre-pandemic, when restaurants had 100% indoor occupancy, it was so challenging for many of them to survive. So we're dealing in an alternate reality type of situation where we really need support. And good thing is, it looks like the federal government, at least the House of Representatives, has now included the Restaurants Act and Save Our Stages Act, which are two grant programs to get cash into the hands of these small business owners to pay for rent, utilities, and all these expenses.
When will that come? When will that take effect?
Well, it hasn't passed yet, but last night the House of Representatives did include it in their HEROES Act, which is the bill that has support for all different sectors of society and the economy. We are hoping this week the House of Representatives will pass it. And I know Senator Schumer and the team in the U.S. Senate is also really pushing to get everyone, including the Republicans, to the negotiating table to get this bill passed. And Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has said that, he does want to support small business. So this is coming from the White House, and restaurants are among one of those types of small businesses that were identified as needing support.
We've had a couple of guests on since you've come onto the show who've talked a little bit about a crackdown on certain restaurants who have not been within the code or the requirements that we're now asking. Have you found any of the people who've been working with who've been suggesting that certain areas are targeted more than other areas, whether that's Hell's Kitchen, areas in Brooklyn, Upper East Side? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'd look at it in two different categories. There may be a handful of business owners that are blatantly violating the rules, and there needs to be enforcement, no matter where you're located, no matter what industry you are. This is, a pandemic, and we need health and safety to be paramount. But I think the vast majority of these small business owners are trying to comply, trying to do the right thing, and we need to ensure that government focuses on education and training first. And then these, revocation of licenses and these penalties that can cost tens of thousands of dollars, they should be focused on as a last resort. But you have heard that specific neighborhoods do feel like they are a target. It's hard to say if it's because of that area. Maybe it's one or two bad actors in an area that have brought attention to it. So there's a lot of different things that play into this. But to me, it doesn't matter where you're located, what type of business you are, etc. We need to have fair and equitable regulations that are applied equally.
Andrew, if we get to 50% occupancy, which hopefully could come, cross your fingers, by maybe January or February, can that keep everyone afloat, or is that still not going to be enough, even with the aid, the aid from the federal government? What are you thinking?
Well, hopefully, if the numbers stay strong, the governor has announced that it could be November 1st where we increase to 50%, which is going to be really important. But listen, 50, 25, 75%, all important, but none of this is going to save the industry, especially these small businesses that have, 6 months of past rent they've been unable to pay. So we're going to need the Restaurants Act, the Save Our Stages Act, which does exactly that, helps pay these businesses, or gives them money to help pay their rent, to pay vendors, to pay payroll. And I think that is desperately needed to help save as many restaurants as possible. But unfortunately, the situation is dire, and there's not going to be a way that we can, across the board, save every business. But every single bit helps. Every bit is critical. And what we really need is we need to keep our health metrics continuing to go down and go down and go down, because unless we're at 100%, unless we have support long term, these are all Band-Aids on, a bullet wound.
Well put. Andrew, as usual, great having you on. Keep fighting the good fight. We'll check in with you maybe in a month and a half, and hopefully things get better and better.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. with José Menéndez, Texas Senator, District 26, Chair of the Senate Hispanic Caucus. And first of all, Senator, thanks for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
In New York, we don't know too much about what really transpired at Fort Hood. And it's a very interesting story. Maybe you can catch up some of the viewers here as to what went on and why you're involved.
The sad thing is that the actual facts of what actually has occurred to these people, we don't know yet. What we had was a spat of disappearances, and then families saying, well, look, we haven't heard from loved ones. And then all of a sudden finding out several people have died. And then they came to find apparently a child sex ring, prostitution ring. And so I think that the reason that I, as the chair, asked my members of my caucus that we'd write a letter, and we did the first request to investigate Fort Hood on July 2nd, after we learned of the death of PFC Vanessa Guillen. And on an individual basis, me and myself have requested additional investigations when we learned of the deaths of Private Gregory Morales and Private Mejor Morta. So there's a disturbing series of deaths. I mean, and if you think about it, these are young men and women who are signing up to defend their nation, to sacrifice themselves on behalf of our country. They're the part of that 1% that wear the uniform, and they're missing and they're dying, and no one has an answer. So on August 28th, we sent a second letter requesting the investigation upon learning of the death of Sergeant Elder Fernandez. And so, at that time, September 8th this year, Representative Jackie Spear, the chairwoman of the Committee on Armed Services Subcommittee on the Military Personnel, and Representative Stephen Lynch, the chairman of the Committee on Oversight, finally opened an investigation on Fort Hood. And they requested the documents and the information relating to the deaths of the soldiers stationed at Fort Hood. As far as an in-depth discussion, I would hope that the pressure that our caucus, and I mean, I don't know about New York, but a state senator here in Texas represents approximately 1 million constituents. So that means our districts are literally larger than a congressional district. And just for your viewers' knowledge, we are going into a redistricting session, which means we get to draft and draw the maps for our congressmen and women. And so that always gets their attention.
The armed services has always been known to really be secular in terms of their protocols, processes. It's not so easy to break in there and find out, well, what has been going on here. Are you finding that that's the usual what's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. My understanding is the current safety protocols include an independent investigation into these claims made by us that our soldiers. We've learned from Patrick Wempe, the Command Inspector General of the U.S., that the independent investigation into Fort Hood revealed more than 1/3 of all the women at Fort Hood reported they had been sexually harassed. That is astonishing and disappointing. And as the caucus, as we stated, we acknowledge the U.S. Army has taken some steps to review, and that it hasn't been concluded yet. But I want to see transparency in a safe military base. And so this is why I've asked for an independent investigation so that our soldiers and their families get the justice they deserve.
I think you're going to be allowed actually on the base to interview the different members of the military.
No.
How's it going to work in terms of finding out exactly what's been going on there?
Yeah, no. The federal government, as most governments, I mean, I've been in elected office since 1997. So what I found since my time in City Hall and in the State House, that every level of government's very secular, if you will, very, very protective.
Certainly, very protective. Absolutely.
Yes, very protective of its boundaries. And so many times the way I get around when a federal agency doesn't want to pay attention to an issue that's been brought to our attention, I make sure I get the attention of a federally elected state official, a federal official. So whether it be a congressman or woman, or whether it be a U.S. senator, And that's how I normally get federal agencies to respond.
Now, let me ask you a question. We've had, I think, almost 28 deaths at this point.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, they say, are completely separate from the next.
Right.
So they say they're not linked, maybe slightly linked.
Right.
How could there be such a coincidence that at this particular base, there is such a high incidence of deaths? I mean, it just doesn't sound right.
It doesn't make any sense, right? No.
Correct. It doesn't.
Okay, so here's the question. The easy way to ask that or to answer that is, tell us how many deaths you have at all of the other military bases. Can you give us a number? If you look at all the militaries over the last 4 years, how many deaths have you had combined? And then let's compare the per capita death rate of your military bases. I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They're not in a theater of war. They're here on the U.S. soil, and that's why I believe that we owe all the servicemen and women a true answer. Because if not, what good family member in their good conscience would advocate to their sons or daughters to go and enlist?
In New York, there's a there's a particular jury charge if you're bringing an action against a school, and it basically suggests that the school becomes the parent of basically the children while they're in school, and they have to rise to the level that a parent would rise to. And in
Right.
some respects, these soldiers and these people who are in Fort Hood, they have to be afforded certain protections because their family members aren't there to talk to or to reach out to. It's almost like all they have is the Army and the colonels and the generals.
That's right.
And there's no one else. I mean, so you really have to almost peel away the curtain to see exactly what's going on. What are your thoughts? Do you think you're going to get in there? Do you think you're going to be able to pierce the veil, should we say? Do you think you're going to get to the bottom of it?
Once again, I'm very certain that the Army is going to only look. I used to have a retired officer who used to be my chief of staff in the Texas House for many years. In the military, they're almost trained. I was going to say the word raised, but trained to dislike politicians. And many of them, it's a hangover from the Vietnam War, where a lot of stupid decisions were made for politics. And that's actually continued over the years, where, in my opinion, odd decisions to go into different theaters of war, create different conflicts, more, I think, for political reasons than others. But anyhow, putting young men and women in harm's way. Therefore, they're very protective, and they're not. They will not open up their personal. They see it as their personal. Their bases, their areas where it's their home, their place where they're supposed to be protective of their men and women, to any politician. So no, will me and my colleagues as state senators, they'd take us on a tour with their civic engagement officer, and once they'd have all the ponies lined up and everything's clean and spick and span, and we would see only what they'd want us to see, in my opinion. Okay. But I hope, and my goal is that our congressional delegation find men and women inside the Department of Defense who would be just as angry as can be. Because one of the things I find too, that's very true across this country, especially here in Texas, you have many families who have a long history of service.
Sure.
The grandfather served, the father, the mother served, the children served. And if you have within our own Department of Defense, somewhere in the Pentagon, people who have a long history, who should feel angry, who should feel frustrated, who should feel a sense of duty to every young enlisted man and woman to go in there and find out what the hell's going on.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you'll come back the next month and a half, and we could see how the investigation is continuing. Thanks again.
Anytime. Thanks, David.
Okay, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. are pleased, as usual, to have returning on, can't say really on set, this is as close as we're getting to really being on set, State Senator Luis Sepúlveda. Luis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I just finished giving out about 500 boxes of fresh direct food to the community because of food insecurity. But, you know, we have to keep pushing to help people.
You know, it makes you feel good, and you're doing good for the community, and all of us appreciate that. I want to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about our jails, our prisons, and COVID. Maybe you can give the viewers a little bit of an update of what's been going on.
Well, we had a public hearing last week to ascertain the impact of COVID on the inmate population and our correctional facilities, to really get a hand on how the state and the city has handled the issue with incarcerated individuals. Some differences of opinion. We had advocates speak. We had formerly incarcerated speak. We had union members speak. We had both COBA and NYSCOBA. We had the commissioner for DOCS and the corrections commissioner for the city of New York. So we had a nice mix of individuals that are stakeholders and have interest in the issue of COVID and the incarcerated population.
Well, is it increasing? Is it decreasing, or is it basically staying the same? You would think it would be decreasing because COVID seems to be at least leveling off in some respects in New York City, but I don't think that's the case, is it?
Well, I mean, recently we read about spikes in neighborhoods in Queens and Brooklyn. But look, in Western New York, there's been also a spike. And as a result of that, Commissioner Annucci from DOCS has ordered that the facilities in the West be priority. Look, up until today, according to the Commissioner Annucci's his own statement, he said that about 13 to 14,000 incarcerated individuals have been tested. The inmate population in New York State is about 33,000. So we're talking about over 20,000 individuals that have not been tested. You speak with some of the formerly incarcerated, and some who released as late as August, who indicate that they're not keeping social distance. The personnel, including corrections officers, are not wearing masks and they're not being penalized. At the mess hall, there's very little social distancing. So, I don't know if that's accurate, but this is coming from individuals that were formerly incarcerated. Now, when you speak to the administration, DOCS, and the New York City Corrections, they give you a different perspective. But I think the fact that the commissioner and the state has ordered testing at a massive scale in the West indicates that there is an outbreak in that area. And my concern is that you're going to see more outbreaks with the coming of cold weather. And interestingly enough, it's not coming from the inmates. It's coming from personnel, from corrections officers that are bringing COVID into the facilities. So we have to resolve that issue, as well as making sure that those that are incarcerated are tested.
How do you think you can resolve that issue in terms of those coming in? Mandatory tests before they even walk into the jails? How do you get?
Well, that is certainly one way. I mean, of course, that the virus has about a 14-day incubation period, so we don't know how effective that was. But we'd like to have the testing the results to be immediate. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is essentially decarcerating the population. There are individuals that are unhealthy, that are older, that really pose no threat to our society like they once did. Individuals that have done significant amount of jail time, that have, according to the metrics, have rehabilitated. So there's really no reason to keep them in there. For example, their release date is within 8, 9, 10 months. Release them now, because the smaller the population, the less likely is that there will be infections.
Interestingly enough, I've heard from a few friends of mine who are criminal defense attorneys that the courts are starting to open up virtually for some of the criminal trials in different. Have you heard anything with respect to that? Is that accurate?
Well, I know that the chief administrative judge of the state of New York has weekly briefings where she puts on videotape what they're doing, and the commissioners are having weekly meetings. So I don't know specifically yet if that's happened. I know it's happened in civil matters because I myself I'm still a practicing attorney, And I myself have have had compliance conferences and things of that nature, litigation matters virtually. And I think that that's the smart way to go until we really have a handle on this. And that's not going to happen, I believe, for at least over a year. And even if we have a virus, I don't know if that's going to stabilize our city and state that quickly.
I'm
even if
just
we have
wondering
a
how.
vaccine, I'm sorry. Even if we have a
I'm
vaccine.
just wondering, how some of the criminal court proceedings, if they do start getting underway, is that going to incarcerate more individuals, or is that going to let people out quicker who've been held someplace? I don't really know how that's going to affect one another, but certainly there is a problem. Finally, with respect to your district, have you seen anything with respect to COVID and an uptick itself in terms of some people who are not doing particularly well? What are your thoughts on the ground, by the way?
Well, interestingly enough, the Bronx is now one of the safest boroughs in the city of New York in terms of transmission of infection. I think a lot of it has to do with the work that the leadership did here. I myself have been able to secure almost 500,000 face masks for the city and the county. I'm getting another 5 to 10,000, working with governments. For example, the Taiwanese government was gracious enough to give us 500,000 face masks, which we shared with city hospitals in New Jersey. And now they're giving me between another 5 and 10,000 specifically for my district. I think it's been those efforts why the Bronx has kept it at a lower level than some other places that you're seeing. And they're following the rules. People are wearing face masks. People are hand washing.
That's right.
People are staying home. And I think that has had an incredible impact in the fact that we went from one of the most affected, certainly in terms of death, to one of the safest right now.
Well put. And we will leave it there. Senator Sepúlveda, thanks again for joining us. As usual, maybe you come back a month or two, give us a little bit of an update. And as usual, please stay healthy and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Looking forward to your next invitation as well. You and Yesenia, please stay safe.
You got it. Okay, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. That's all we have for tonight. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions or anything you want to discuss during the show, please email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Always remember, know your issues, know your rights, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.